What's the worst experience you've ever had with a neighbor? Story 1. When I first moved into my house, I didn't know my exact property line yet, so I put some wood by a tree I thought was mine. My neighbor came over saying it was his tree, so I went ahead and got a survey done to settle any trouble. He was pissed when it turned out I owned 10 feet beyond the tree. Problem solved though. Story 2. I lived above a guy in a really old fourplex, and I guess the wood floors squeaked really loudly when I walked around. It's not like I was stomping around either, but the dude would constantly come upstairs, bang on my door, and yell at me to stop moving. I felt bad for him in the beginning because he seemed genuinely frustrated, but he didn't seem to understand or believe that I wasn't slamming my feet on my floor, his ceiling. I called my landlord several times asking if he had a solution. I couldn't move because I was locked into my lease, but my landlord was just like, buy a lot of rugs. It got to the point where I couldn't take the constant yelling, and I was literally either tiptoeing around or hopping from my couch to my chair just to get out of my living room so that he wouldn't be standing at my door yelling at me. Finally, I went downstairs one day and asked if we could talk about the situation because I felt like maybe if I looked him in the eye when he was calm and explained that I wasn't doing it on purpose and that there was literally nothing more I could do. I had already bought area rugs, for fuck's sake. He would maybe understand. So I went downstairs and very nicely explained, and he seemed to be listening. And then he said, I'm about at the point that if it happens again, I'm going to show up at your door with a really big knife. And then he just stared at me. I basically ran out of there, called my landlord, and said that I was more or less being threatened. A month later, the guy moved out. And then as soon as I could, I did too. Super shitty situation. Story 3. We moved into a brand new house and noticed an old toilet, garbage, and a broken down hot tub in the neighbor's front yard. Okay, we made cookies for all the neighbors and went over to introduce ourselves. He laughed and slammed the door in our faces. Okay, we were out landscaping our new yard, laying some bricks. My husband was on his knees making sure they were level while I stood and handed him the bricks. The neighbor walked by and yelled, Well, I can see who wears the pants. My husband and I looked at each other, perplexed. Okay, we got a puppy. Our other neighbor let us know she witnessed the neighbor's grown son throwing lit cigarettes over the fence at our puppy when he was in the backyard. We found about 50 cigarette butts in our yard. We don't smoke. Then she also had to call the police because his other son broke the lights on her garage and defecated on her welcome mat, all captured by her home video system. About 6 months later, we got a complaint for dog barking with a $500 fine. It was ridiculous. Our dog never barked unless someone walked by or came to the door. We had letters from all 16 surrounding neighbors attesting that our dog never barked. What great neighbors we were, and how crazy the complainant was. The letters were not admissible, since it was 2 pathological adult sons and the neighbor's word against ours. 2 sane, working adults. We lost and had to pay. We sold the house and moved shortly afterward. Story 4. It wasn't to do with me, but with my parents before they had children. When buying their first house, our current family home, they arrived on their motorbikes to view it. After deciding to buy it, they greeted the neighbors. The neighbors expressed how thankful they were that the biker couple didn't buy the house, then proceeded to rant about how much they disliked bikers, without knowing my parents were the biker couple. As you can imagine, it didn't go down too well when they noticed the bikes. Anyway, on to the more interesting part. A few weeks or months after their initial chat with the neighbors, my parents were sitting in the living room minding their own business when they heard an explosion. They ran outside to find both of their bikes engulfed in flames. They called the fire brigade, who put out the fire. One of the firefighters approached my mom and pointed out that there were matches lying around, and this was more than likely an arson attack. My mom didn't pursue it with the police for God knows what reason, but while in a fit of rage, she told my dad, "Whoever did this is going to break their right leg." Coincidence or not, a week later that neighbor came home with his right leg in a cast. Story 5. Okay, so I live in Brooklyn, New York. I recently got my own apartment in Greenpoint. I have a pretty great job in Midtown Manhattan that offers a lot of overtime. So I have crazy hours and I commute to work. When I leave work late, usually around 11:45 p.m. every night, I catch the late trains and it takes me anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour to get home. Anyway, when I get home around 12:30 a.m., I'm exhausted and I just kick off my shoes and throw them and my duffel bag wherever they land, usually on the floor right by my apartment entrance. When I first moved into my apartment, I always heard banging from the neighbor downstairs. I never thought anything of it. I was always like, is this person serious? They're working on their apartment at 1 o'clock in the morning. It wasn't until maybe 3 weeks ago that I realized they were getting upset about the banging I was making over their heads. I guess our apartments are set up differently, and their bedroom is directly under my living room. I've become more conscious of the noise I make when getting home and started gracefully taking my shoes off and placing my belongings on the couch. Regardless, the person who lives down there has never actually come up to my apartment to address the issue, but I find it hilarious because I just picture them lying in bed cuddled up with a broomstick or something similar, just waiting for the slightest pin drop so they can jump on top of their bed and start stabbing their ceiling. Story 6. I was in a car accident when I was young, maybe 8 years old. I had my 2 sisters, one younger and one older, in the back seat with me, and in the front were our babysitters, who were, and still are, very close family friends. We went off a curb on our very own road that was notorious for accidents. My brother would total his car slamming into a telephone pole on the same corner a few years later. Anyway, we slid off and the car flipped several times. It was the middle of winter in northern Vermont. We had tons of snow, and it was insanely cold out. We were all okay since it was a low-speed accident, but the Jetta doors had crunched in, and the only way we could try to get out was by kicking the windshield, which was cracked to hell. While our babysitters did their best, we couldn't get out. By this time, the person whose lawn we had rolled onto came down. He was very nice, but couldn't get to us either. He told us he would go get his parents, who lived just up the road, to help. He returned with his parents. My babysitters' faces were a mixture of disbelief and concern. For context, my babysitters are black, and this guy's parents were their next-door neighbors who were extremely racist. They would shoot in the air and in the general direction of the family's home and shout about America on basically every remotely patriotic holiday. It came to a head one year when they shot through 2 layers of the fence our babysitter's father had installed out of worry for his many kids, and us, because we basically lived there, on the 4th of July, and they were finally warned by the local police. Now, while analyzing our situation, the faces on the guy's parents were a mixture of disgust and amusement. To this day, I'll remember them saying, "We aren't lifting a damn finger for these N-words," and then they turned, chuckling to themselves, and left. The guy was embarrassed and apologized on behalf of his parents. A few minutes later, a fire truck arrived, because nothing ever happens there, so why not? And they broke open the doors and helped us out. I was freezing and confused, as were my sisters. That act of racism has always stuck with me as totally fucking abominable. I sincerely hope those 2 assholes met a crappy end. Story 7. The other day, I went out into the backyard for the first time in a few weeks to get an idea of what I would need to buy to keep the yard looking nice. As I surveyed the yard, I noticed several plastic grocery bags tied into bundles on one side. I walked over to investigate and tentatively prodded one of the bags with my foot. It contained a dirty diaper. I knew the lady next door had recently had a baby, and she also had a small boy who looked to be around 4 or 5 years old and was prone to throwing toys over the 6-foot-high privacy fence, so it didn't take much deduction to figure out who the culprit was. I tried to imagine my parents' reaction if they were told I had been throwing dirty diapers into a neighbor's yard. The fact that I'm alive to write this is proof that I never threw any kind of trash into a neighbor's yard. I was just about to go back inside and tell my wife about the gifts our next-door neighbors had bestowed upon us when I saw the woman next door open her back door to let her dog out. It crossed my mind to say something right then, but since all I could see was the top of her head, I didn't think that would make for a proper conversation. I went in and told my wife about our neighbor's benevolence. I said that I had seen the woman next door was home and that I was going to go over and tell her that her dirty diapers were in our yard and request that her son, who threw them over, pick them up. My wife agreed and told me to be nice. I said I would. I calmly walked next door and knocked. No one answered. I could hear a television playing inside, and I had just seen the woman a few minutes earlier, so I knew someone was home. I knocked again. No answer. I knocked louder. Still no answer. A thought popped into my head. This woman is pretending she's not home. I wasn't going to be put off. I knocked again. No answer. I was about to turn back home in defeat when the woman's son and 2 other neighbor girls came running across the street to the house. I asked the boy, who I knew was the one tossing the diapers over the fence, "Is your mother home?" He smiled and said, Yes. Can I talk to her? Sure. He opened the door, stepped inside, and yelled, Mom, there's a man out here who wants to talk to you. Inwardly, I smirked. She came to the door. She wasn't dressed to meet company, which was probably why she hadn't answered in the first place. I'll never understand why women have to be dressed to answer the door. If you go to someone's house unannounced, unexpected, and uninvited, you have to expect they might not be at their best, or even mostly dressed. When you throw out your dirty diapers, do you wrap them in plastic shopping bags? I asked her. Her jaw dropped at my Kreskin-like ability to describe her diaper disposal technique. Well, I've got 4 of them in my backyard. She turned and fixed her son with a smoldering look. You go over there and pick those up right now. He grinned slightly and started out the door. It's not funny, she scolded him. I suppressed a grin of my own. It was funny. Disgusting, but pretty damn funny. I unlocked the gate to the backyard so he could get back there and retrieve the poop packages he had tossed over. He picked up the first one, turned his back to his house, and flung the putrid parcel over his head toward his own yard. It hit the side of the house with a thud. I could no longer pretend this wasn't amusing. I chuckled and shook my head. He did the same with the remaining bags, hitting the house each time. I told him I wasn't mad at him. I just didn't want any more dirty diapers in my yard. He said, okay, then ran back to play with his friends. I'm sure his mother was embarrassed by the incident, just as my mother was surely embarrassed by me on several occasions. I guess if you're going to have children, embarrassment is something you just have to deal with. Story 8. In university, my best friend and I rented a walkout basement suite of a house with a young family upstairs who had a couple of kids around 3 and 5. When we initially moved in, we went to introduce ourselves and tackle all concerns up front, like you do, and the wife answered by just barely peeking out the door, saying no more than 3 words to us before closing the door on us mid-sentence. Fast forward a couple of weeks. We started to have a few people over for board games and a few beers. We laid the ground rules for everyone to be out around 10:30. We heard a knock on the connecting door, and it was the mom saying we were too loud as they were trying to put the kids to bed. Fair enough. We quieted everyone down and headed out to a cafe. The next morning at literally 5 a.m. p.m., right above my room, it sounded like goddamn dwarf blacksmiths slamming sledgehammers on the floor, shaking the house. I figured I'd cut them some slack because of the night before. Maybe an early morning of IKEA furniture assembly? Perhaps a one-time thing. I got on my bike and headed to school. The next morning, BM, 5 a.m. again, dropping bowling balls. Only this time he stopped and came directly around to both of our bedroom windows and just stared through them for what seemed like an hour. I had to get to class, so I hopped on my bike and headed out. That evening, I went and knocked myself. The wife answered, refused to let me speak with her husband, and then slammed the door again. Frustrated, I called and let the landlord know what was going on. He said he'd speak to them. Okay, hopefully that works. Next morning, again, 5 a.m., b.m., b.m. I'm thinking, what the hell is this? The Flintstones family upstairs. Again his smug face appeared, walking up and staring through our window. Keep in mind, I'd still never met or talked to this guy. I got up and tried to go outside to speak with him, and he hurried back upstairs inside. Now it gets better. This went on for about a week, and every time I tried to approach them, they ran away and locked their doors. Finally, one night I was like, fuck it. We had some people over to pre-drink on a Friday, and we were a little loud because who cares at that point, right? We left for the pub around 9:30 p.m. and went out for a solid time. The next morning, I went to grab my bike to head out to a soccer game, and it was gone. From a locked storage room both units shared. The storage was still locked. I thought maybe I misplaced it while drunk. Could happen. Nope. Found out later that earlier that morning, he had stolen my $2,000 downhill mountain bike and sold it at a pawn shop. We promptly moved out not even a month into living there. Story 9. The other day, I went out into the backyard for the first time in a few weeks to assess what I needed to purchase to keep the yard looking nice. As I surveyed the yard, I noticed several plastic grocery bags tied into bundles on one side. I walked over to investigate and tentatively prodded one of the bags with my foot. It contained a dirty diaper. I knew the lady next door had recently had a baby, and I also knew she had a small boy who looked to be around 4 or 5 years old, who was prone to throwing toys over the 6-foot-high privacy fence, so it didn't take much deduction to figure out who the culprit was. I tried to imagine my parents' reaction if they were told I had been throwing dirty diapers into a neighbor's yard. The fact that I'm alive to write this is proof that I never threw any kind of trash into a neighbor's yard. I was just about to go back inside and tell my wife about the gifts our next-door neighbors had bestowed upon us when I saw the woman next door open her back door to let her dog out. It crossed my mind to say something right then, but since all I could see was the top of her head, I didn't think that would make for a proper conversation. I went in and told my wife about the neighbor's benevolence. I said I had seen the woman next door was home and that I was going to go over there to tell her that her dirty diapers were in our yard and request that her son, who threw them over, pick them up. My wife agreed and told me to be nice. I said I would. I calmly walked next door and knocked. No one answered. I could hear a television playing inside, and I had seen the woman just a few minutes earlier, so I knew someone was home. I knocked again and waited. No answer. I knocked louder. Still no answer. A thought popped into my head. This woman is pretending she's not home. I wasn't going to be put off. I knocked again. No answer. I was about to turn back home in defeat when the woman's son and two other neighbor girls came running across the street to the house. I asked the boy, who I knew was the one tossing the diapers over the fence, "Is your mother home?" He smiled and said, "Yes." "Can I talk to her?" "Sure." He opened the door, stepped inside, and yelled, "Mom, there's a man out here who wants to talk to you." Inwardly, I smirked. She came to the door. She wasn't dressed to meet company, which was probably why she hadn't answered in the first place. I'll never understand why women feel they have to be dressed to answer the door. If you go to someone's house unannounced, unexpected, and uninvited, you have to expect they might not be at their best, or even mostly dressed. When you throw out your dirty diapers, do you wrap them in plastic shopping bags? I asked her. Her jaw dropped at my Kreskin-like ability to describe her diaper disposal technique. "Well, I've got 4 of them in my backyard." She turned and fixed her son with a smoldering look. "You go over there and pick those up right now." He grinned slightly and started out the door. "It's not funny," she scolded him. I suppressed a grin of my own. It was funny. Disgusting, but pretty damn funny. I unlocked the gate to the backyard so he could get back there and retrieve the poop packages he had tossed over. He picked up the first one, turned his back to his house, and flung the putrid parcel over his head toward his own yard. It hit the side of the house with a thud. I could no longer pretend this wasn't amusing. I chuckled and shook my head. He did the same with the remaining bags, hitting the house each time. I told him I wasn't mad at him. I just didn't want any more dirty diapers in my yard. He said, "Okay," then ran back to play with his friends. I'm sure his mother was embarrassed by the incident, just as my mother was surely embarrassed by me on several occasions. I guess if you're going to have children, embarrassment is something you just have to deal with. Story 10. I purchased a farm out of foreclosure, 70 acres, with a house and barns. I didn't know that the ex-wife of the farmer lived in a mobile home next door. She had gotten 10 acres and the mobile home in her settlement. The first complaint started a month or 2 after I moved in. In the last 4 years, she has made more than 100 complaints to every agency she can think of. Plowing my land and planting grass after corn? She calls the local planning department and claims that I am filling and grading without a permit. So I have to deal with the code enforcement officer for a couple of hours. He's annoyed. I'm annoyed. Waste of everyone's time. Then she calls the fire commissioner. Then the sheriff because I was trespassing. I showed the sheriff the survey I paid for and the stakes in the ground. It's my land. Then animal control. My dogs are vicious and threatening her. Then animal control again. I'm feeding bad things to my pigs. Then animal control again. My pigs are rampaging through the neighborhood. Then the sheriff again. I'm harassing her. So I get served with an ex parte motion for an anti-harassment order. I'm ordered to stay 400 feet from her house, which prevents me from farming 5 acres of my land and actually prevents me from being in the north end of my house. 3 weeks later, the judge throws it out. Then the state veterinarian, my pigs aren't being cared for. Then the health department, unsanitary conditions, what manure? Then the Department of Ecology, discharging pollutants into the waters of the state. Then back to animal control, my cow is out. Truth be told, when I had a barn constructed, I had pigs and cows get out. Folks would leave gates open until I yelled at them for doing that. Animal control decides, because of the volume of complaints, to refer the livestock at-large charges to the prosecutor, So now I have to worry about criminal charges in addition to civil fines. More sheriff visits, more animal control visits. She accuses me of luring her cows onto her property or having someone I hired do that, and calls the sheriff and animal control. All the while, she's telling everyone who will listen that she is 70 and on a fixed income. All I want to do is live on my property. The final straw was when she turned me into the building department for buildings constructed without a permit. Yes, they were. They were constructed during the time she owned this farm and was married to the previous owner. By her. I can't really sue her. I'd win an empty bag. She's broke, declared bankruptcy a couple of years ago, and owes twice as much on her mobile home and acres as they're worth. Guess she went for the second mortgage in a big way, and she's retired. So she has nothing better to do than sit in her trailer, look out the window, and call agencies. Every workday, my attorney said to me the other day, "Hey, do you see an endgame to this?" No, I don't. She's angry and lashing out, and not even towards a goal. She needs a new hobby. Story 11. I had this one downstairs neighbor who lacked any respect for the fact that our building wasn't sound insulated. He would listen to loud music, mostly during the day and sometimes late at night. I'm a patient person and tried asking him to be careful, or sometimes I'd bang on the floor when I just wanted to sleep. This lasted for months, but nothing was ever done by the landlord. One day, though, I think he discovered that he really loved Gnarls Barkley's Crazy, and he decided it was appropriate to play it half a dozen times in the course of an hour, and I just had it. I really blew it. So, being a karaoke jockey and having my equipment on hand, I decided to show him what loud really was. I connected my speakers to my computer through my console, then went hunting for the absolute worst karaoke cover of that same song. I remember vividly. It was this creepy fat basement dweller in his late 40s dedicating the cover to a random 14-year-old girl on the internet. And it was horribly off-tune, the voice this annoying falsetto. So I played it, with the speakers flat on the floor so he'd get the full brunt of it. I played it 3 times in a row, loud enough that he would definitely suffer the consequences of his lack of respect. And wouldn't you know it, he never played that song again and started being much more conservative with his volume levels. He left that summer, and I never heard Crazy again from his collection. I wonder why. Story 12. My family has owned a cottage on one of the Finger Lakes in western New York for 18 years. About 6 years ago, a small convenience store opened up at the top of the hill above our cottage. At first, it was an awesome perk because we no longer needed to drive 20 minutes into town if we forgot anything, and the store had awesome sandwiches. We quickly became friends with the owner of the store, who was just an all-around awesome dude. After his store grew more and more popular, he decided to put a bar on the back of his store and blast live music off his back deck. Our neighbors, a sweet little 80-year-old Jewish couple, complained, saying they didn't want the bar on the back of the store as it devalued their property and the music was way too loud. The store owner went off the deep end. He called them Jewish slurs, kicked them out of the store, and just made their lives a living hell. My father saw what was going on and stuck up for our neighbors, and we were also getting a little sick of the bar and its obnoxious customers. The store owner did the same thing to our family that he did to our neighbors. Being the stubborn bastard that he is, my dad fought back and found that the store owner had violated some zoning laws in the creation of his bar. It got shut down. Thus started a massive war between my dad and the store owner. The store owner found that he owned about 5 feet of lawn in front of our cottage that we had maintained for 18 years and cut down the trees, leaving 6-foot stumps in our yard. He refuses to let us park cars there and leaves garbage cans with no purpose just sitting there. My dad took a stake out of the lawn, and the owner called the police and tried to have him arrested. It's starting to get so bad that the entire town knows about this feud, and my dad was actually just interviewed by the Wall Street Journal about it. Story 13. Where do I start? I've had crazy neighbors constantly because I was in a military family and moved a bunch. When I was around 6, we had this neighbor who hated that my little brother and I played outside our house. She would come out and yell at us, saying we made her kids jealous or whatever. I think they had a germaphobe mom who didn't like them going outside. Then we had a neighbor kid under 10 who slept over one night. The kid was really pale, and at 3 a.m. he went into my mom's room weeping, saying he wanted to go home because he missed his mom. They literally lived right next door. Fast forward a couple of years, and we had this Vietnamese family move in next door to us in South Georgia. This is where it gets really odd. The full count of how many people actually lived there was unknown. What I do know is there were always 7 or 9 cars outside the house. The father would stand and look over the fence while my little brother and I were swimming in our pool. Then he put up a sign that said, "Last warning." This obviously worried my parents, so they went and talked to him. Turns out, the guy thought we were stealing beer out of his fridge and his koi fish out of his pond to play with in our pool. I don't know anything about the beer, but I'd imagine it had something to do with the 20-plus people in and out of his house daily. We did solve the koi problem, though. As I mentioned earlier, we lived in South Georgia, and we have cranes and herons down here. One morning, while getting ready for school, I saw one on top of his gazebo looking at the fish. We snapped a pic, but he refused to believe the evidence. We moved again closer to town and had amazing neighbors for a while. Then one of them moved out, and this asshole moved in. The guy was a stay-at-home, while his partner was a traveling salesman. This led to him constantly doing yard work, so he could be outside to talk to anybody walking by. He would also come over and ring my doorbell to talk about the weirdest shit. Turns out, the guy is a compulsive liar who likes to spread rumors about anything. Some of the ones he tried to spread about me were that I trashed his yard with crazy parties, with people parking on his lawn and blasting music until 5 a.m. Now, I do have a couple of people over occasionally, but that's just to chill and play Mario Party or something. I've only thrown one huge party, but he didn't live there at the time. I wouldn't have known anything about these rumors until one day. While I was out on a fishing trip with my buddies, the guy came over and told my father, who was visiting, all these lies. When I got back, my dad asked me what was going on, and I got furious when I heard this. I'm the type of dude who offers to mow my elderly neighbor's lawn because they have enough problems as it is. I wanted to confront him, but every time I pulled home from work or he saw me start to walk my dog, he would run inside. I mentioned it to my other neighbors in the area, asking if I'd ever disturbed them, and they said I was a great neighbor. I'm content with him running every time he sees me now because I don't get bothered. I'll be moving soon, and I hope this trend doesn't continue. Story 14. My home is the last house before a corner. I have a next-door neighbor to my left, 5 homes backing onto my property on the right, and 1 home behind me. The 4th home on the right is a woman in her 60s and her 183-year-old mother. I bought this house almost 11 years ago after I got divorced. I introduced myself to each neighbor and gave them my number in case there was ever an issue so they could call me. Over the past 10 years, I have had the police called countless times, bylaw officers visit multiple times, and numerous visits from each, resulting in not one single ticket. They scream at kids, when mine were younger, and the neighbors' kids, to shut up when they're playing outside on summer days. They call the cops and bylaw officers and waste their time over every single thing they feel is noisy, regardless of whether or not it's a violation. It's really fucking annoying. Aside from my introduction, I've never spoken a word to them. All of the neighbors know what cunts they are and have told them that they should live in a retirement community as opposed to a family neighborhood if they want silence. The best part is that they send letters to me. Typed letters. With a typewriter. Nobody uses a typewriter anymore unless you're a hipster or a 183-year-old crypt keeper. I've had letters questioning my parenting, my dog ownership, my trampoline placement, etc. I've never replied. I've never said anything, for the most part. I just didn't care. At this point, I'd like to mention that I'm a very outgoing, friendly guy. A couple of things happened that pissed me right off. Last year, on the Saturday of Canada Day weekend, things took a turn for pissing me off. Saturday, 8 p.m., my wife and I were listening to jazz, sitting on our deck, having a glass of wine. It was full daylight. 2 cops walked into my backyard. I told them I'd meet them in the front yard. I went out front with my glass of wine and greeted them. They were embarrassed. They explained to me that by the wording of the complaint, they were expecting a raging death metal party, yet they arrived to see my wife and me listening to jazz and not disturbing anyone. I started receiving letters complaining about my dogs. My older lab, who passed away in October 2017, literally never barked. Last August, I got an Italian Mastiff who only barks when she wants to come in. I work from home, so I let her in. 2 letters came, and the final one stated that if I couldn't keep my dogs quiet, I should have their vocal cords removed. That final letter pissed me off. I decided that the best approach was to file a complaint for harassment. When the police came to take the report, I asked, "I assume you've reviewed the call history and see how many times they've called you about me?" The response was a chuckle and, "Yes." This only ever happens when there's a bigger issue than noise, or the complainant is bats hit crazy. They went and spoke with the old ladies last September and told them that if they continued to file complaints, they would be charged with criminal harassment. I haven't heard a thing since then. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.